Festival. Please give him a warm welcome, Joshua Oppenheimer.
Woo! We just met him today.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming to see this, the world premiere of The Act of Killing. Thank you, Tom, for inviting the film to the Toronto Film Festival. Thank you to the festival. Thank you to a number of people in the audience without whom this film would not exist, starting with my parents. Thank you to so much of the rest of my family. I have my brother, my sister, my aunt, my uncle, my cousins. It's amazing, thank you. I have my partner who has been my comfort during what's been a very, very long and difficult and painful journey. I have some people who helped make the film. I have one of the two co-directors on the film, Christine Sin. She's standing in the back. Thank you so much.
Hey, Christine.
I have the indomitable, patient, brilliant, kind producer of the film, Sina Burra Sørensen. And her equally fabulous other producer of the film, Anna Kuhnke from Copenhagen. And I have one of the film's editors, Mariko Monpetit, a Canadian. And I really want to make a very, very, very special thank you to the enormously dedicated and, rather for a documentary, enormous crew in Indonesia, going from costume design to choreographers to assistant directors to a co-director, all of whom must remain anonymous to protect their safety because of the present political situation in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And none of whom, for the very same reason, to protect their safety, could be with us tonight. To all of you, a very, very, very big thank you. Terima kasih sebesar-besarnya. Commissioned in 2001 to 2002 to make a film in Indonesia in a community of survivors of the 1965-66 killings. It was a community of plantation workers, about 50 miles or so from the city of Medan, where we made this film. And in this community, these plantation workers were working on an oil palm plantation, and they were using a very, very, very toxic chemical called paraquat to kill weeds on the plantation. And the paraquat, very difficult time organizing a union to struggle for better conditions on this plantation. And the main reason they were having trouble organizing a union, and that was part of what our film was documenting, was because of fear. And the fear was the fear that came from their families having been victims of this genocide. There had been a very, very strong plantation workers union. That story seemed like a very, very important part of this film we were making. The film's called The Globalization Tapes, and it was made kind of collectively with me and Christine more as facilitators. 40 years earlier at the time. It was less than 40 years earlier at the time. It's been a long time. And they were too scared to be seen talking to us about what had happened in this community, but they said, you'll be able to film the killers, and they live all around us, so it shouldn't be, that's why we're scared, but it should be no problem for you. And we asked, well, where do they live? And the people we were filming with said, well, in fact, the 2 houses down, one woman said, is the person who killed my aunt, and just two streets over that way is the person who killed his mother. And so we realized we were living, after several months living there, that all around us were the people who had killed these people's relatives, and that these people had been living in fear of their killers, or of their relatives' killers ever since. So one day I went with a camera outside of the house of one of these people who was pointed out to us, and I acted as if I was just there to film village life. Goats, people herding goats, working in their gardens, and so on. But in fact, I was waiting to become a curiosity to these people, to this man, and be invited into his house, and that happened very quickly. I think that this man, his name was Sharman Sinega, presumed that I was on his side simply because I was a foreigner. They knew I was American. The Americans had supported what they'd done. Virtually everybody in the plantation region outside of Medan who has the money for a car to drop them off in the village or pick them up from a village is on the side of power. It's just presumed that they're on the side of the perpetrators of these massacres and the military dictatorship which grew out of it. So he immediately was delighted to know that I was American and started to talk about, and to have me in his house, and immediately started to talk about how he killed members of the Plantation Workers Union back in 1965, how he killed them by drowning them in an irrigation ditch, well, one by one. But the most curious thing was that his granddaughter, who was 10 years old, was in the room when he started talking, and she looked on board as he would sort of volunteer a simple reenactment of what he did. And for me, that was the beginning of this journey, and it was the beginning of this story. How is it that then it was 2002, that these people who committed these crimes, who murdered all these people, can be boastful about it, and in front of their children and grandchildren, for whom are they boasting? How do they want to be seen? How do they think I see them? How do they think the rest of their society sees them? How do they think the survivors who live all around them see them? So for me, that was the beginning of, that was the profound question, much more important in a way than the question of what exactly happened, although that felt of world historical importance. But the nature of this impunity that I discovered, and that's what it was an impunity that went beyond impunity and entered into the realm of celebration and joy. And that felt both terrifying, profoundly important, profoundly disturbing, and allegorical for sort of the way all of our societies in some way are built on terror and violence. So I began filming with this man, and then asked him to introduce me to the other members of his death squad, all around this plantation. And from there, asked them to introduce me up the chain of command to the city of Medan, and then to army generals living in Jakarta. And thus began the act of killing.
Take some questions